This building is the Rice Museum in Amsterdam, Holland, the home of the prime collection of Dutch painting. The Rice Museum is currently the scene of a shooting.
You've previously made a movie about Rembrandt. So what is your fascination of him?
Again, you know, if you're fascinated in painting, and I think this is much to do with theory as practice. I mean, I have a big exhibition coming up of my own paintings in Milan, so I'm still a practicing painter as well. I think you can't possibly ignore the golden age of Dutch painting, which is so important in northwestern Europe. It's the first time, I think, you know, there's a profound movement away from Italy and the Mediterranean. And I think the center of all that tradition must be Rembrandt. And I think Rembrandt is probably the most successful painter ever, because he ticks off so many important things which are important to us now in the 21st century. You know, he's a Republican, he's a Democrat. This is the first democratic political experiment in Europe. We're talking about 1600. You could also say, I couldn't describe him as a feminist, but you could say he was anti-misogynist. He never ever paints an ugly painting of a woman, which is really rather surprising at that time. He might paint ugly women, but that's a different thing. I think he paints everybody. You know, he doesn't just paint aristocrats and the church. He paints the child with a shitty nappy who lives next door, and the guy, you know, with the walking stick and the soup in his beard. He's very, very active. There's a huge body of work. And he's not, you know, he's not painting like Jackson Pollock. We can see over a period of 400 years what he's talking about. I think you can use some pompous words too. You could say that he's post-Freudian. So he paints, you know, emotion on people's faces, but there's a way it relates to an interior as well as an exterior. And many, many painters before Rembrandt, of course, have painted emotion on faces, but he's the first guy where you feel there's a real understanding about an interior world creating, you know, the notion of an exterior world. You could also say he was that ghastly word postmodernist, which is to say, you know, he's non-judgmental. He's not saying, he's not accusing people of being good or evil. You know, people are people are people, and this is how they behave. And I think he's also got an enormous sense of humor and a great sense of irony. So, you know, these are all the things, whether we behave that way or not, which we think of ourselves, you know. Democracy, Republican democracy is regarded as the most important political system now. Very inadequate, especially if you're President Bush and want democracy at the end of a gun. But, you know, we're all supposed to be, you know, good feminists, and we're supposed to emancipate the notion of the female as an equal partner. Sadly, it's still not true, as you would well know. But things are getting a little better. And I think, you know, our sense of irony, and I'm very interested in that idea, you know, which is a very contemporary phenomenon. There's no such thing as history. There's only historians. So everybody is allowed a point of view. You have to argue it, and you have to be knowledgeable. I mean, the price of a good democracy means that everybody has to know what's going on. Otherwise, a democracy is stupid because people make stupid decisions based upon ignorance. So even though then we might not fulfill, you know, tick off this list of saying, look how good we are, at least is predicated way back at the beginning of the 17th century. And I think Rembrandt represents that. Also, I should say probably two more things which are relevant to me. He's the beginning of modern painting. So all the Impressionists and all the post-Impressionists, the leap over into non-figuration of the 20th century is all related in some way to him. And also, I think he's the first film director. He paints artificial light. And a definition of cinema is the painting or the organization of artificial light. He has some contemporaries. There's the Italian Caravaggio, the Spanish Velázquez, the Flemish Rubens. But I think the four of them, they're all painting exactly the same time, around about 1600. And these are the first people to actually paint artificial light. And let me repeat, that's what cinema is all about.
Where did the bullet go?
I accuse you, gentlemen, of murder.
They shot Hasselberg! Someone shot Hasselberg!
In the movie, you say that our culture now is visually illiterate. What do you mean about that?
Have you been to art school? Has he been to art school? You're visually illiterate. Just think about it. Just think how sophisticated, especially you, across all the language barriers, because English isn't your prime language, how very capable we are in explaining sophisticated meaning, because we've been practicing it all our life. You know, as kids we learned the alphabet, and as adolescents we piled up the words, and as adults we never finished polishing our ability. But who spends as much time and energy and interest in the manufacture of images? Just because you've got eyes doesn't mean to say you can see. So the only places where we can have that intensity of an examination of the image relative to the intensity of the way we've learned text would be in professional places like art schools or design academies, or maybe, you know, media consortiums or architectural colleges. Very largely, you know, people don't inhabit those places. You know, I talk to audiences all over the world, and I often ask the audience, you know, who's been to art school, and about 8%, only 8% of the audience actually puts their hands up. You know, you don't have to know about color theory, you don't have to know about compositional organization, 3 dimensions against 2 dimensions, etc., etc., etc. You know, you can speak all our languages without understanding the laws of grammar. That's not going to get in the way. So I don't think you should make it a terrifying sort of academic exercise. But, you know, there are people like Umberto Eco, you know, sort of Italian guru of the media, and he says, you know, the world's been organized for 8,000 years by those people who can handle text. They wrote our holy books. They organized our political systems, our charters of understanding, our ethical systems. And now, thanks to the, I suppose, notions of the very visual digital revolution, these guys have got to move aside now and allow the visual makers, the image makers, to come forward and organize and structure our civilization. But if most people are visually illiterate, we're in trouble, because these guys are not going to be particularly sophisticated to handle all the communications that are so necessary for the future.
A man is dead, shot through the right eye. The relevant authorities should investigate. The Night Watch has been endlessly scrutinized, examined and contemplated, and considered to be full of mysteries, into which Rembrandt has scrupulously painted an indictment of guilt in paint.
And I want 9 months, human gestation period. If it takes that long to make a baby, it will certainly take that long to make a painted arm.
So what do you want your audience to learn from this movie?
Well, I'm supposed to be, you know, a cinema maker, and surely cinema should be right in the center of this sort of education. But it's full of paradoxes, because we don't have an image-based cinema. We have a text-based cinema. I cannot possibly go to a producer or studio with 4 paintings, 3 prints, and a book of drawings and say, give me the money. They wouldn't know what the fuck I'm talking about. They need a text. So, you know, everybody from Lars von Trier to Godard to whoever, you name it. And one of the big products of the last few years have been, you know, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, all back to the bookshop. So it's text, 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 text. I have to convince a film producer with a text, not with a series of images. You know, when I was a kid in England, we referred to the movies as going to the pictures. Okay, there are pictures up there, but pictures in a curious way are not the primary concern. It's this bookshop's narrative storytelling which dominates. You know, we have to tell a story, and that story is really existing in words, either written or spoken. I'm trained as a painter, so I'm obviously very prejudiced here. I want to have an image-based cinema. I want to have sophisticated communication through images. So I suppose, you know, my whole film career has been this business. Let's communicate ideas through the primacy of the image. Famous French philosopher Derrida says the image always has the last word. And I'm sure that's just as witty in Danish as it is in English.
My husband was certain that everyone in the painting stands accused.
It is imperative that we reopen the case.